Good evening, everyone. Hope you all had a good afternoon. Got a nap, Bill?
Yeah.
Good. Good job. Let's remember those undergoing cancer treatments: Mark Topper, Lori Sprock, Susan Hampton, Lori Tintorni, then others struggling with just health or life. Judy's family, Angie Taylor, Marla Lax, Eli Britt and his family, Brandy Hibbler, Dee Jenkins, Ford, Mindy Carney. She getting better, Robin? Bob Bruner. And then those are the lost loved ones. How do you say that last name? Excuse me? Van Rankin?
Jenny's grandma. Jenny Estrada's
Okay. The Baxter family, and then the Sims family, and then those shut in, Barbara Bass and Mott Coleman. Building Your Faith Bible Hour, Thursday. 2 more weeks, 3 more weeks. 2 more weeks. Wednesday, August 9th, into summer Building Your Faith presentation and ice cream supper. Perryton Work Day, Saturday the 22nd. Leaving here at 6:30, Buck, right? Not meeting here and drinking coffee and having a snack. We're driving away. Okay. All right. Bring what you need: ice, water, something to eat. Any other things on the list of equipment? All lined up? Okay. Family meal Wednesday night at 5:30. And then events at the nursing meals, a birthday celebration, and singing.
And nails will be this Tuesday.
Nails are this Tuesday. When did you get that started again?
It's only been once, right? Only been once.
It's good that you've gotten that started again. I didn't realize that was back underway, and the singing, that was back underway.
They just said they're ready for it.
They're ready. Okay. That's good news. It's good news. Okay. 24th through the 26th. 9th. Anything else we need to discuss before we get started? We're good? Okay. If you would, turn with me to 7:18. 7:18. We shall assemble on the mountain. We shall assemble at the throne with humble hearts into His presence. We bring an offering of song, glory and honor and dominion unto the Lamb, unto the King. Oh, hallelujah, hallelujah. We sing a song of me. Assemble on the ground. We shall assemble at the throne with humble hearts into His presence. We bring an offering of song, glory and honor and dominion unto the Lamb, unto the King. Oh, hallelujah, hallelujah. We sing the song of me. 6:15. 615 will be the song before opening prayer. There's within the heart a melody, Jesus whispers sweet and low. If he be still, in all hearts ebb and flow. Jesus, 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 sweetest name I know. Fills my every longing, keeps me safe as I go. Feasting on the riches of His grace, resting beneath His sheltering wing, always looking on His smiling face. That is why I shout and sing. Jesus, Jesus, sweetest name I know. Fills my every longing, keeps me singing as I go. Soon He's coming back to welcome me, far beyond the starry skies. I shall make my flight to worlds unknown. I shall live with Him on high. Jesus, 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 sweet I know, fills my every longing, keeps me singing as I go.
Father in heaven, we're so thankful for this day. We're thankful for the night that we get to come here together and really study the word and have fellowship. We ask you to go be with us to our service tonight. We ask you to be married, to be with us. Apply to our lives. We examples of Christ, great King. Father, we ask you to be with those who are sick and suffering all over the world today. Comfort them in the only ways. Father, we ask you to be with us through the service. Ask blessings on this congregation. We represent you in a way that bring people to Christ. We ask these things in Jesus' name.
Song before our lesson tonight will be 608. 608. He took my burdens away, up the rider, making a song, a wonderful song, a wonderful song that God can sing. In our joy bells ring. He gave me a song, a wonderful song. He gave me a song to sing about. He lifted me. Oh, praise His name. He is my King. Song is true. Rider, the way grows every day. Not heavenly way. He gave me a song, a wonderful song. A wonderful song is a wonderful song that God can sing. Praise to Him, my King. He gave me a song, a wonderful song. A wonderful song. He gave me a song. He gave me a song to sing about. He lifted me from sin and down. Oh, praise His name. He is my King. A wonderful song. He is true.
every king no more to die and to say goodbye. He gave me a song, a wonderful song, a wonderful song in sundry days in that fair land. He gave me a song, a wonderful song, a wonderful song. He gave me a song, he gave me a song to sing about, to sing about. He lifted me from sin and doubt, from sin and doubt. Oh, praise His name, oh, praise His name. It's my King, a wonderful song, a wonderful song. He is to me, He is to me.
Judgment tonight will be 552. 552.
I hope that you keep the last two songs in mind. They go very well with this lesson, hopefully. And so keep that last song. He gave me a song to sing about, and all those words. The last Sunday night, we looked at a blind man's faith. We noted that blind faith is not a biblical faith. We have to have evidence, but it's interesting and maybe ironic to find out the many examples of blind people who ended up having true faith in Jesus Christ. And I thought we would look at some of those for our Sunday evening studies after looking at last week and studying for this one this week. And there's actually 4 blind men we're going to look at today, and they're in 2 different groups together. And so there's 2 different instances, but you find 2 different situations where Jesus is coming across in the book of Matthew. So if you want to be turning there, I just want to read through both of them, and then we'll go through and make some points of application regarding them and how we can have hopefully a similar faith, not a blind faith, but a faith like these blind men. And so Matthew chapter 9 is where we'll start. Matthew chapter 9. And I believe this instance is the only one of this particular, these 2 particular men in Jesus' ministry that is not mentioned in the other gospel accounts, whereas in Matthew chapter 20, that account seems to be talked about also and recorded in Mark and in Luke, as far as I can tell. So, but we're only going to look at Matthew tonight. Look at Matthew chapter 9, verse 27 through 31. Short but powerful few verses. When Jesus departed from there, 2 blind men followed him, crying out and saying, Son of David, have mercy on us. And when he had come into the house, the blind men came to him, and Jesus said to them, Do you believe that I am able to do this? They said to him, Yes, Lord. Then he touched their eyes, saying, According to your faith, let it be to you. And their eyes were opened, and Jesus sternly warned them, saying, But when they had departed, they spread the news about him in all that country. Then if you'll turn over to Matthew chapter 20 and maybe mark these places, because we'll be going back between them for the evening as we make our points of application. Matthew chapter 20, verses 29 through 34, as Jesus is coming out of Jericho and towards Jerusalem. He's making his way towards his last few days, his last week, into Jerusalem. Well, these 2 blind men are outside of Jericho, as you find in verse number 29. Now, as they went out of Jericho, a great multitude followed him. And behold, 2 blind men sitting by the road, when they heard that Jesus was passing by, cried out, saying, Have mercy on us, O Lord, Son of David. Very similar cry. Then the multitude warned them that they should be quiet. But they cried out all the more, saying, Have mercy on us, O Lord, Son of David. So Jesus stood still, called them, and said, What do you want me to do for you? And they said to him, Lord, that our eyes may be opened. So Jesus had compassion and touched their eyes, and immediately their eyes received sight, and they followed him. A few moments, but we're going to look at 7 great truths tonight, because I like the number 7. 7 great truths, and I think that you can find them here in each of these instances for the most part. There's a couple that are not in chapter 20. But you find a great cry. Back in chapter 9, verse number 27, what is it that they cried out saying? They didn't cry out and say, Jesus, some great prophet, or a great man of God. They said, Son of David, right? They were affirming him to be the Messiah that they've been looking for, both in chapter 9 and in chapter 20. They both assure and affirm that Jesus is the Son of David. And so that's the first part of their cry. They cry out in verse 28, and then they cry out in 2 different verses in the second instance that we looked at. That word for crying out is the idea to shout or to scream. I don't think that they were necessarily screaming it. I do think they were shouting, one, to let Jesus know that he probably wasn't too close to them, and so that he could hear. They had a faith that said, I need Jesus to notice me. I'm going to cry out as loud as I can so that he will notice. I think that might be interesting and maybe a point of application, crying out to God. Whereas maybe they could have said, hey, can you come by here, Jesus, please? But no, they cried out. They were in desperate attempt to get Jesus to see them, to help them. And that's the other part of their cry, is not only what they affirm about Jesus and how they do it, but what did they ask about Jesus? Have mercy on us. They needed mercy. They needed help. So a point of application for us. Do we have this kind of faith to cry out to God? And not necessarily, I'm not saying that he can't hear you if you're quiet. I'm saying that the desperation in our voices, maybe when we need help, do we cry out like they did when they needed mercy? 1 Peter 5, verses 6 and 7. Therefore, humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time, casting all your care upon him, for he cares for you. That's what they were doing. They were casting their care upon him. They said, we care for you, and we know that you care for us. Can you help us? So do we do that? We know that every one of us needs help in this life. We need help from God. We need help from our Christian family. Another point of application from chapter 20. I'm going to say that a lot. I keep messing up, but chapter 20, when I say verse 20, it probably means chapter 20. Think about what happened with the multitude. They cried out, and then the multitude said, no, don't do that. Jesus can't be bothered with you right now. He doesn't need your mercy. He's got a mission to do, and you're not worthy. They didn't say those things, and so I might be assuming too much. But they definitely told him to be quiet. I don't know exactly why. But what did they do? They didn't just stay quiet, at least in chapter 20. They didn't say, oh, okay, that's fine. No, they said, we need Jesus, so we're going to say the same thing, and we're going to say it louder, right? They cried out all the more. But when you think Jesus didn't hear you, or when people are trying to stop you from seeing Jesus, cry out all the more. There's a great cry, and I think we can learn from their faith just to do that. Secondly, we see a great approach. A great approach, and I think I see the approach is not only they approached Jesus, but Jesus approached them. It seems like Jesus stopped and came into a nearby house, chapter 9, verse 28. When he had come into the house, the blind men came to him, right? So he provided an opportunity. He didn't just keep passing on through, at least in chapter 9. And then and provided an opportunity for them to come to him, to approach him. And God always provides that opportunity for his children. In chapter 20, verse 32, it says that Jesus stood still and called them. Where is Jesus going in chapter 20? He is going to Jerusalem to be the Passover lamb for us. but he has time to stop and approach these people and at least stand still so that they would be able to approach him. And then he called them to himself and said, "What do you want me to do for you?" I think that's a great approach, and it's echoed by the sentiment in James 4, verse number 8. I'm going to be referencing James a lot, but James 4, verse 8, draw near to God, approach closer to God, and he will draw near to you. I think you see that literally here. That as they cried out, that was their first attempt at approaching God, is don't leave us, stop by, stay here so that we can meet you. And God does through Jesus. I think about, I want to ask the question to us, do we believe that? Do we believe this verse, draw near to God and he'll draw near to you? If we feel like God is far away, then one, he probably is, but two, it isn't his fault. And so we need to be drawing near to him, and he'll draw near to us. Not only do we believe and have the faith enough to approach God, but do we do all that we can to approach him? To approach him all the opportunities that we can. I'll tell you that I miss many opportunities, but we need to be looking for more opportunities to praise him, to draw near and close to him. I think about the song that I think we sing, "Where could I go but to the Lord?" They could have gone literally to other people, maybe help them, but nobody's going to heal their blindness. They needed only Jesus at this point for this situation. And when it comes to sin, you can't go to anybody else but Jesus. Yes, you can go for help, but ultimately for forgiveness, you go to God. Number 3, you also see in Psalm 105, I think I added this in towards the end, but Psalm 105, verses 3 and 4. Seek the Lord, 3 and 4. Glory in his holy name. Let the hearts of those rejoice who seek the Lord. Seek the Lord and his strength. Seek his face forevermore, kind of like what we talked about this morning. We can go to a lot of people for help. We should be able to go to our church leaders for help, and we should be able to go to our church family for help, and possibly our physical families and friends. But when we need the ultimate help, we need the strength of God, we go to God. We seek him and him alone. Back to Matthew chapter 9, you have a great question. The Wellington congregation, the Bowie Street congregation in Wellington, is doing a summer series, and theirs is the great questions of Jesus. When Jesus asked a question, you might want to listen up. And I think that's true for us. And so I find this question very interesting, and I don't know if this is one that's on, you could probably go for a number of summers with that topic. But chapter 9, verse 28, he says, "Do you believe that I'm able to do this?" He wanted to know if they had faith enough that he could do what they asked him to do. Some people ask God, but they're not quite sure if he can do it. These blind men had no problem, and we'll see that. Basically, he's asking them, do you have faith in me to do that? I know what you said, but do you believe what you said? In chapter 20, verse 32, he kind of says a similar question. He says, "What do you want me to do for you?" They said, "Have mercy on us." And so now he's going to ask him, "What is it that you think I can do for you?" Gives them the kind of an open-ended question to say, what do you want me to do? What do you think I can do? What do you have faith and believe that I'm able to do? That's a powerful question, I think, and to ask us as well. He's not going to ask us that physically today, but we can ask ourselves. We can ask one another here tonight. Do you believe that God is able to do what you ask him to do in prayer? We have this prayer list, and it gets awfully long at times. Unfortunately, that's life, and things happen. But fortunately, we have the power of prayer. And we say the power of prayer. I don't know if we always believe it. I'm not saying that God is going to do a miracle, but we know that God can work through prayer. He worked through providence and through the doctors and nurses and medicines taking care of them. He can. Do we believe that? And again, I'm not saying that if we believe it, then it's going to happen. And if it doesn't happen what we wanted, then we didn't really believe it. That's not the case. Sometimes that's just not how it goes. But James 1, verses 6 through 8 points out to us and to many, any other Christian. He says, "But let him ask in faith with no doubting, for he who doubts is like a wave of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. For let not that man suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. He's a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways." It's pretty tough language from an inspired writer saying that if you doubt that God can do it, he's not going to do it. And so it tells us that we need to have that kind of faith. And we'll talk more about that in number 4. But we need to have that kind of faith. And here's the great faith that they had. Back in chapter 9, verse 26 through 28, we'll see this. I say 26 because we have to look back at the context for a moment and see their faith that was there before they ever saw Jesus. And the report of this, of what Jesus did, went out into all that land. Don't you think it got to these 2 blind men? It seems like that's the case. The very next verse, when Jesus departed from there, 2 blind men followed him, crying out. How did they know he was the son of David? They couldn't see him. They must have heard, right? They must have heard. They heard about who Jesus was, and they had faith to believe it. In chapter 20, verse number 30, it says, when they heard that Jesus was passing by. Again, they couldn't see it. They heard the fact that people were claiming Jesus is passing by. They must have heard of who this Jesus was and who he claimed to be as well. And that's when they cried out saying, have mercy on us. I think that's the great faith you see, just like last Sunday night. The fact that he had great faith before he ever saw. And same thing here. But here's another point. Back in chapter 9, if you look in verse 28, when he asked him the question, do you believe that I'm able? They said to him, here's their great faith. Yes, Lord. It doesn't say that one of them said that, and we know that one at least did, but it seems like both, right? They said to him, they both believed. They both had great faith, individual faith, and they said, yes, Lord. And then verse 29, according to your faith, let it be to you. What would have happened if they didn't have great faith? What would have happened if they did not fully believe that Jesus was able to do that? What if one said, yes, Lord, and the other said, I'm not sure, Lord? I believe the one that said, I'm not sure, probably would have stayed blind. He said, let it be according to your faith. And so now the application for us, when we ask for God for something in prayer, what if he said, let it be according to your faith? Would things happen like this? Not miracles, but God working. I think that's a powerful lesson for us, that our faith needs to be shown, just like James chapter 2, verse 19 tells us that, and we'll talk more about James chapter 2 in this series, but James 2, verse 19 says, you believe that there's one God, you do well. Even the demons believe and they tremble. They have a little bit of faith. They have enough faith to believe in who God is. They have enough faith to tremble at his name, but they don't have enough saving faith to do what God has said to do. And that's the question for us is do we have this kind of faith that acts like the blind man and like, or hopefully better than the demons? Number next, a great miracle is seen. A great miracle. And this one's quick, but chapter 20, verse number 34, it gives us the quickness and the testament of the miracle itself. Jesus had compassion touched their eyes, and immediately their eyes received sight, and they followed him. It wasn't days later, hours later, minutes, but it was instantaneous. That is a miracle. That's why we do not see miracles today. There are a lot of good things that happen. There are a lot of medicines that take care of things like cancer. But it's not miraculous. It takes time. But miracles don't. Same thing in chapter 9, verse 29 and 30. Then he touched their eyes, and their eyes were opened. It's like there was no pause between the two. It happened. And not only that, they were able to know what things were, right? That's another part to the miracle, is that they're blind. They've never seen things as far as we can tell. It doesn't say that they were blind from birth like last week. So maybe they've seen some things, but now their eyes are opened, and Jesus did exactly what they believed he could do, right? According to their faith, this miracle happens. Number 6, there was a great warning. And it's not given in chapter 20, but it's given in chapter 9, and I think there's reasons for that. We'll talk about those briefly. In Matthew chapter 9, there's a great warning in verse number 30. Their eyes were opened, and Jesus sternly warned them. He firmly, strictly said, he gave them these orders, and the orders were not what we often think they might be. This is very interesting when it comes to spreading the gospel and the good news about Jesus. It's interesting when we find passages like this. He says, see that nobody knows it. Why? Why is that the case? Why does Jesus want nobody know about the miracle of healing 2 blind men? Nobody else could do it. It would affirm him as Messiah. We have that list of verses there in John. And we'll take a look at all of them. But John chapter 2, they ask him to do a miracle. And Jesus said to her, woman, what does your concern have to do with me? My hour has not yet come. Jesus knew that there was a certain time that he needed to develop the faith in his apostles. And he says it wasn't the right time. We're just getting started in John chapter 2. In John chapter 7, he says, my time has not yet come, but your time is always ready. And then in chapter 7 of John, verse number 30, it says, therefore they sought to take him. And Jesus is in the temple preaching and doing miracles. And they try to take him, but he escapes miraculously. I don't know what that looked like. I'd love to know. But it says no one laid a hand on him because his hour had not yet come. It wasn't time. God wasn't ready to let Jesus be crucified. It was going to happen, and it had to happen at the right time. And so I think you see the reasons behind this. In Matthew chapter 9, Jesus is pretty early in his ministry, probably within the first year or so. And because of that, he says, don't let anybody know it, because when I go to Jerusalem, they're going to want to kill me already, and it's not time for that. But then in Matthew chapter 20, he doesn't say this. He doesn't say this because he is ready to go. He wants the news to be known. And so I think that's why you see this warning here. And there are multiple times you have chapters 12, 13, 17, where Jesus says, it's now time. I know when my time is. And he says, this is that time. The hour has come, chapter 12, verse 23, that the Son of Man should be glorified. He knew that there would be a time. And then he starts to say, tell people about me. More so. Last one this evening, a great proclamation. There was a great cry, a great approach, a great question, a great faith, a great miracle, a great warning, and now a great proclamation. Despite the warning that's given to them. Verse number 31 of Matthew chapter 9. When they had departed, they spread the news about him in all that country. That's where I think the songs tie in. They couldn't help but be singing and preaching about Jesus. It was just their life. He had changed their lives both physically and spiritually, so much so that it was outpouring. It was bubbling over outside of them and into the country and land that they were going. they couldn't help but proclaim it. Mark chapter 7 gives us kind of a commentary on this, or on why this often happens. In Mark chapter 7, verse 36, then he commanded them that they should tell no one. And so this is after he heals someone who is deaf and mute. And he says, he said to tell nobody. But the more he commanded them, the more widely they proclaimed it. Now, I'm not going to answer whether it's right or wrong, but I'll tell you this. There are many Bible examples like these few that we've looked at, where people are told not to tell about Jesus and they can't help but do it. But sadly, there are too many examples today in our nation and in the whole world. We are told to go and spread the news, and we don't. It should be the case, the lesson for us is that it should come out of our lives, that we should always be talking about Jesus and helping others see him. How do people know to ask us about our faith if they don't know we even have a faith? These people knew. And in 1 Corinthians 9, verse 16, Paul says this, and yes, Paul is a chosen apostle of Jesus, but he's also just a Christian. And any old Christian, every Christian needs to be a proclaimer of the gospel. And he says this, woe is me if I do not preach the gospel. Woe is me. If I am not proclaiming the gospel, danger be upon me. Wrath be upon me if I am not doing what Jesus himself said for his followers to do. Woe is me, Paul says, and so woe is you and I if we do not preach and teach the gospel. Acts 4, verse number 20. We'll end here. Acts chapter 4, verse number 20. It reminds me of this situation. The church had just begun in chapter 3, and Peter had his great sermon there on the day of Pentecost in chapter 2. In chapter 3, he also preaches on Solomon's porch there. And in chapter 4, they're arrested. Both Peter and John are arrested. And after they're tried, this is what happens. They said this at their trial. In verse number 20, for we cannot but speak the things which we've seen and heard. We can't keep it inside of us. He says if we do that, it's going to be like Jeremiah, it's like fire in our bones. That's what Jeremiah is saying. That's what they're saying here, is that he is so much a part of our life, it's just going to come out of our life. It's going to come out of our mouths. It's going to come out of our actions. And you see that in these blind men, and you see that here, that they say that boldly before people that have the ability and power to keep them in jail or to sentence them to death. And they said, we just can't help it. We're going to do it whether you tell us not to or not, or you tell us to go back and do that. We're just going to do it because that's what God said to do. In verse number 21, they further threatened them and they let them go, finding no way of punishing them because of the people, since they all glorified God for what had been done. And then verse 23 through following, through verse 30, they pray for boldness, right? They said, we were just bold, but we need more boldness because the people are going to come after us as preachers and teachers of the gospel. They prayed to God for strength to be bold. And then verse 31, when they had prayed, the place where they assembled together was shaken. They were all filled with the Holy Spirit, and they spoke the word of God with boldness. They were happy to be counted worthy of suffering for Jesus' name. They were happy to do so, just like the two blind men were. If you back in Matthew chapter 20, I believe it said this, and I want to make sure I have it right. When these two blind men outside of Jericho, when they received their sight physically, they didn't just go about their normal business, but they were changed to follow Jesus. It says, and they followed him. When our eyes are opened up spiritually, that should be the case, that we also follow Jesus. And I know that everybody here follows Jesus, but we can get off track. Make sure we have great faith like these blind men. That's the question we ask again tonight. Do we have great faith? That's what we need to have. We can help one another have that. And ultimately, if we go to God and ask for great faith and we believe it, I believe we'll get it. But it's going to take some effort. It's not going to come miraculously, but it'll come providentially through the study of His Word, through the fellowship we have together, through worshiping Him at the times that we have available to us. Think about these blind men as you think about this week, and do I have that kind of faith? If you struggle with faith in any way this evening, or you need the prayers of the church, or you need to be baptized into Christ, won't you come as we stand and sing a song of invitation?
Have thine own way, Lord, have thine own way. Thou art the Father, I am the clay. Mold me and make me after thy will, while I am waiting, yielded and still. Have thine own way, Lord, have thine own way. Search me and try me, Master, today. Whiter than snow, Lord, wash me just now, as in thy presence, humbly I bow. Have thine own way, Lord, have thine own way. Over my being, absolute sway. Filled with thy Spirit, still all shall see. Christ only always living in me.
If you weren't able to partake of the Lord's Supper this morning and would like to do so, okay. Our closing song tonight will be 716. 716. Before that, we'll have a closing prayer.
Our dear God, Heavenly Father, we thank you this day. We thank you for the opportunity to be here. Just to hear a message that will feel our faith stronger and stronger. Father, we know that we're so proud to have the Bible. We study it and live by that word and use it in our everyday lives. Father, thank you for our military men and women that serve our country, that protect our freedom that we all enjoy each and every day. We just ask for comfort and safety for them until they return home to their families. Father, thank you for the love and grace that you show each one of us each and every day. And again, Father, we thank you so much for the prayers that you've already answered for us. Father, there's those that might be traveling that we ask for safety for them. Father, thank you for your Son, the sacrifice he made for each and every one of us. Our name we pray.
Sing to me.
Of heaven, that song of peace from the toils that will bring release. Burdens will be lifted than our pressing sun. Showers of rain, blessing from my heart will flow. Sing to me of heaven, let me fondly dream of its golden glory, of its burning peace.